The only reason old queens like me are raising our ugly head is because you're dragging us into this shit because you guys are identifying as fucking lampshades and now seasons. Well, you know what, bitches? You know what my season is? Nuclear fucking winter.
Hey everybody, I'm Brad Polumbo, and welcome back to the Damage Control podcast, where we are reclaiming the debate over LGBT issues from the crazy people who've taken it over. My guest today is Tim, also known as the Grumpy Old Gay on TikTok, and we talk about how the LGBT community has changed over the years and about the criticisms that older members of the gay community have for younger queers, which he calls queerlets. Buckle up and get ready for a great conversation, but first, don't forget to hit that like button, and please do consider subscribing and sticking around, and don't forget to leave a comment. I do read the comments. Now, without further ado, let's get into the interview. So, for folks that haven't discovered your account yet, there will be a link to it, and we'll probably tease a couple of your videos in the intro, but you are the now or increasingly TikTok famous Grumpy Old Gay. Tell us what that's all about.
It actually came from an insult from a younger member, I'm assuming, of the LGBT community. I had made a TikTok poking fun at something that I had saw. And someone in the comments section said, "Oh, just what we need, another grumpy old gay chiming in." And I was like, I think it's hilarious. You think that's an insult? For my generation, we're happy to be old and kind of grumpy.
Yeah, you're not that old.
No, not at all. But, to the younger people, I may be considered ancient. In gay years, 30 becomes old.
Yeah. I'm coming up on that, so we don't need to linger on that subject for too long. So I do want to kind of just probe a little bit about like what your background is. Like I know that you're a professor, you do TikTok stuff. But back in the day, were you involved in gay rights activism? When did you come out? What was it like for you when you were younger?
I came out when I was still in high school in the early 90s. I grew up in
Wow.
I grew up in a very small town outside of Orlando, Florida. So I, grew up, going to Disney and things like that. And then I decided I started undergraduate school in South Florida. And I had met who I call my fairy god homo. He was my best friend. I was working part-time in a pharmacy. I originally was going to study veterinary medicine and was trying to get some medical experience. And he was actually one of my pharmacy patients. And we lived in the same apartment complex and we just kind of hit it off. And I want to say 18, maybe almost 19 at the time. And he was 40 something and his partner was 40 something. They were both Puerto Rican queens from Brooklyn. And it was great. I just had this mentorship and he, kind of helped me not fall into a lot of the things that I say is the detrimental aspects of gay culture. I was a bartender for many years and I would see what we would call newbies that would come out and you would see these really, really nice guys that were newly out. And then I would see them a couple months later and they were just in this completely different space in their life. And I thank my best friend, Jay, for helping guide me on the right path. And then much like everybody else, COVID happened, and that's kind of what got me involved in TikTok. My undergraduate degree is in microbiology, and people were spreading a lot of misinformation about COVID-19. So I started making short little educational TikToks, and that was it. My activism technically started in college because my fairy god homo, he had full-blown AIDS. That's how I met him. He was assigned to me as part of my pharmacy patient. And I got involved with the West Palm Beach Comprehensive AIDS Program, Fort Lauderdale Comprehensive AIDS Program. So my activism kind of began there. And then there was a reverend, I think his name was Dr. James Kennedy. He was a very anti-gay pastor in South Florida. So he was spreading some hateful things. This is way back before Westboro Baptist Church was the prominent anti-gay church, and he was televised and he was right down the street. So we would go down and just, peacefully protest with signs out in front of the church once in a while, trying to show that we were real humans. And that with, I would say, protest for more funding for AIDS research, because I was seeing my best friends die. I was bartending at the time, and a lot of my customers, they would stop coming in, and I would ask, hey, have you seen so-and-so? And the code word back then was, oh yeah, they surrendered. So I was kind of in the mix of gay culture in South Florida during the AIDS epidemic, and that's kind of what got me started. I wouldn't say activism, but I was definitely part of the peaceful protest movement that was occurring in South Florida in the early and mid 90s.
That's the kind of stuff that's always so humbling for me, like being younger and not having grown up through that, but having had the pleasure of meeting a lot of older gay people who, walked so we could run. The idea, like, honestly, I'm not even able to fully comprehend what it would have been like during the HIV/AIDS epidemic and how cruelly gay people were treated during it and what indifference there was to their suffering and what victim blaming and all this horrible stuff. I can't fully wrap my head around it, having just been born after it had, um, you know, at least the worst of it had long since subsided. So I guess I always, when I read about it or hear about it from people, I'm always pretty awestruck by it. But I also always want to ask them, and I've talked to a couple older gay commentators and writers on this podcast who have said as much. But is it kind of bizarre for you? Because at least I don't know about you, but I feel like in 2024, things are not perfect on the state of LGBT issues. Surely not. But like, still not the, other than maybe a few years ago, like just 2019 or 2021, or before things started to get a little toxic again. There's really not been a better time to be gay in human history. At least that's my perception of it. What's your thoughts on that? And also, like, what do you make of it when you hear kind of doomsday-esque perceptions of what's going on? Especially you see this a lot on TikTok, a lot from really young people who, even from major LGBT organizations. I mean, HRC declared a state of emergency in 2023 for the first time ever, which they never even did during the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Is that, I mean, that must feel kind of strange seeing that, having lived through times and seen stuff where things were a lot worse.
It does. Quite frankly, I did not know HRC did that. And it is interesting because they did not really do that during the 80s and the 90s that I'm aware of. I mean, I could be wrong. It's not, it's hard to describe, because when you try to talk to younger people, you're not trying to come across as condescending and not understanding where they're coming from. But there are parts in the back of my mind, where you're thinking to yourself, you think you have it bad, and you don't. You have it pretty good. And you don't know what it's like to have your best friend. My best friend died in 2001. That kills me, because every day I think of how much he missed and how proud he would have been able to see his little daughter get married right after it was legal. That wasn't something we even fathomed back then. The fact that we now have protections from being fired and terminated for being LGBT, that to me is remarkable. And it seems like, to me, I call it oppression appropriation. It seems like people have to find something to do this woe is me. And I mean, you're right, not everything is perfect, but I don't understand why there is this obsession with focusing on the negativity and not celebrating how far we've come, the accomplishments that we have, and how good we have it compared to the people that came before us. It's like you said, even me as the grumpy old gay, I can run because the people that came before me allowed me to run. And they were walking and getting spit on. They were getting things thrown at them. I've been spit on. I've had things thrown at me just for being me. And it seems like, I don't know, because I kind of live, I guess, in this sheltered bubble now, because I'm not as active in the community as I used to be. I'm kind of old now and have an early bedtime, but it's almost like now it's how provocative can you be? And how shocking can you be in your quote unquote queerness? And then when people are shocked, it seems like they want to play victim. And that's what I don't get. It's the whole, I have to identify in a specific way. And being a professor, I have lots of friends in education. And since I started making these TikToks, I've had so many people reaching out to me that are teaching middle school and high school, and they're saying the teenage girls are obsessed right now with pronouns and all of these descriptive terms that I have no idea what is going on. And I have no idea where this could be coming from. I mean, I used to consider myself a pretty liberal person. I mean, I did. I always considered myself very, very liberal. I've definitely understand the importance of educators to validate a student. I also think that there is a fine line about representation in public school versus crossing that line. For example, I just had this debate with a coworker a while ago about certain things that are being removed from libraries here in Texas. And I say that everything comes with, it's a double-edged sword. There are certain books that I'm like, this is a harmless book. I think My Shadow is Pink is a great little children's book. It doesn't specifically push anything. It doesn't specifically address trans. It's just a little boy who happens to be different and like to dress in a specific way. But when you advance it into certain young adult literature that's in middle schools and high school, and this is both for LGBT and straight things, there are certain things that are in those texts that I'm like, I don't think that's really all that appropriate. I remember when I was in high school reading things in literature. One of the examples that I was giving was we had to analyze the poem Leda and the Swan. And we were in high school, but once you realize what that poem was about, I was like, why are we reading this? This is a sexual assault of a woman by a swan who's technically Zeus. Why would we be reading this in a public school setting? So I do feel like that sometimes things are being twisted to specifically attack LGBT books rather than the broad spectrum of books that maybe cross the line in public education and should be maybe taught maybe later in college. But I definitely feel like it seems like there's been this shift for us to identify as, hey, I'm Tim, I'm gay, I have a husband, my life is pretty normal, to now this transition to, I feel like some people are pushing an agenda. One of my TikToks that I made, I guess I live in this protective bubble. I could not fathom a teacher describing what was happening. They were talking about themselves being trans in the classroom, and it was a second grade class. And I was like, this has to be the far right media just blowing something out of proportion. Something's being taken out of context. And one of my TikTok friends said, hey, I hate to break this to you because I love your content, but I need you to look at this video. And I watched, and it was during the lockdown. And I thought to myself, this was a very poor choice on the teacher's part. This was a second grade class. It was a getting to know you activity. And this is something that you could have picked any other fun fact about you. And for some reason, you seem to pick that fact. Then I see all over TikTok more and more people that are identifying as non-binary talking about how they're going to explain to young children that they are non-binary and then what their pronouns are. And that doesn't really sit well with me. I don't know how, because I guess it makes me a hypocrite in the fact that I don't think there's anything wrong with if a student asks a teacher, are you married? And you say yes. I mean, okay, that happens all the time. It happened when I was in school. I'm sure it still happens now. What's your wife's name? I don't have a wife. And then leave it at that. I feel like that is one thing, but another thing is to describe, I'm non-binary, I am this, I go by this pronoun. That is going into something that is way above the concept of understanding.
I don't think that is hypocritical, because one of those things is coherent and the other one is incoherent. I have very hot takes on non-binary. I'm not assigning any of this to you, My view is that it's not legitimate, it's not coherent, it's rooted in crude sex stereotypes, actually, right? Oh, I can't be a girl, I like short hair. Androgyny, I'm totally okay with. If you want to be, I don't believe in gender stereotypes. So if you want to be dress butch, dress mask, whatever your vibes are, what I don't accept is that that has to make you a different gender, because you're actually, by saying that, kind of reinforcing gender stereotypes, that in order to be me and be, be a female but have really short hair and have this masculine wardrobe or wear ties or whatever, that I'm actually not a woman. I would say, actually, no, a woman can do any of those things. That's perfectly fine.
I made a TikTok about that and I got read for filth in the comments. I agree. I wonder if the suppression of talking about anything like that has led to this subculture of Reddit, Tumblr, Discord, all of this stuff, because you have teenage girls that don't feel like they fit in. And the thing is, what my sciencey mind, why are we seeing it predominantly in Caucasian females? That's my question. Why are we not seeing it in Hispanic, Asian, and African American students at that level at the same rate? So to me, it's almost like they're looking for something to belong, because teenage, it's the whole adolescent brain reforming, trying to find your niche, and nobody is comfortable in their skin in adolescence. And you have this whole teeter-totter of what should you talk about in public schools and what should you not talk about in public schools. And then you have the parents saying, I don't want teachers talking about that, which I agree, it's your right as a parent. But on the other hand, if you're not going to have that conversation at home, and you're not allowing educators to even remotely talk about the fact of what you just said, of it's okay to be a girl who likes to do boy things that are stereotypical boy things. It's okay for a boy to like to do things that we associate with traditional girl things. If those conversations aren't happening at home and they're not happening at school, they are happening online. Mm-hmm. And then they're given this label, kind of like you said, that, oh, well, I'm not this or that. I must fall into this third category of non-binary. When we all can agree that the social norms of gender have changed over time, and we're not having the intelligent conversations with these students. And I feel like they're seeking out answers, and unfortunately they're seeking it out with people online rather than their parents or people that are actually well versed in this area.
Well, and I, one of the points that I've seen you make that I appreciate is, like, not everything needs to be a label, right? Like, once you get past the T and you start going into this territory, I've heard things like sapiosexual, which is attracted to intelligence. And it's like, babe, that's not a sexual orientation. Like, that's just something you like in a partner or you find sexy. Like, that's not what this is. And not everything needs to be labeled to the point where this community sounds like a Wi-Fi password.
Yes. And I don't understand. I remember way back when, and don't get me wrong, because I have very good friends that are trans, and I've been accused of being transphobic in the content that I've made. And I'm like, you're missing the point of what I'm saying. I'm actually thinking that trans are the most vulnerable members of our community. And I'm tired of people cosplaying. That's what I call it. Because
Fake
if you want to identify,
basically,
what?
The people they're appropriating trans.
Exactly. So I was sitting there talking about, because we're starting a podcast with other grumpy old gays that start at the beginning of next month, for just in time for Pride Month. And we were talking about this, and they were like, well, what made you want to start speaking on this? I go, I feel like, when you're at a dinner party, you're not the host, and there's one really obnoxious guest there, but you're not the host. So you decide to keep your mouth shut, and you're looking at the host and you're looking at everybody else, and you're like, is someone going to say something? And no one says something. I'm that loudmouth gay Italian that I said something, because the trans individuals, I've had trans students in the past, and that journey is completely different than the gay journey, the lesbian journey, and the bi journey. And I'm not one of those people that think the T should be separated, because there's so much intersectionality. One of my best friends is a trans man who is in relationships with other men. So we would identify him as being gay. But I also understand that he is a vulnerable trans gay man. And you cosplaying it and saying that I identify as a lampshade and you're part of the trans community, that gives actual trans people a bad rap. And you're making them more vulnerable than they already are, because we've seen this in the past where you're going to outgrow this. A lot of these people are going to outgrow this. And who's left to pick up the pieces? The trans people and the rest of the OG LGBT community, because you use this as some type of, fun little thing that you thought made you interesting.
No, exactly. Like, I have trans friends who legitimately have gender dysphoria and have had it since they were 5 years old, right? That's not going away. They're not going to grow out of it. The only solution for them is to live as the other sex and live their best life. And I've always supported their right to do that. Same thing, gay people are not going to grow out of it. There's no converting. None of that works. That's all nonsense. But like the people going by neo pronouns, that's a personality. That's a fad. That's a social phenomenon. That is not actually an innate characteristic, an immutable demographic trait, right? And so people aren't going to take that as seriously, but it's getting tacked on to the rest of us. And I think they are sinking the boat.
I agree. And that's why I made that TikTok of I had a group of elderly gay gentlemen that came for me in the comments and saying that, people like me, we were, let them be kids. Okay, go on that new boat. I even said, like, gay men my age apparently love to go on cruises. I've seen the Love Boat. I know what we're supposed to do at my age. Go get on that boat. But I think that boat's going to sink. And I hope to God they give you, because, the gay community will welcome you back, but that boat is going to sink. And hopefully they give you that life vest and first dibs on that lifeboat. And you can come back on the OG LGBT ship, because that is just a dumpster fire of oppression. And the thing is, I don't know any of them that are happy. That's what kind of makes me sad, is the fact that you look miserable. I mean, like, we all know that there's going to be miserable gay, lesbian, trans people, but I don't see them being genuinely happy. It's like they're picking fights and then they're miserable because they're not winning the fight. And I'm like, when do you get tired of just making up stuff to battle?
I do feel
Nobody
bad for them as well because, like, for example, I've seen the TikTok meltdowns over being misgendered. And I try to respect people's pronouns within reason. Like, I'm not going to call you a lampshade, but I will respect pronouns within reason. But like, if you are so devastated that a bank teller called you she and not they or he, that you're crying in your car and filming it, I have compassion for you because you are not well, right? Like, you have to be internally solid in your own sense of self and your identity, that you don't need constant validation from the world, because the world is a mean place and not everybody's going to be nice to you and validate you all the time. What I worry with a lot of these hyper online LGBTQ plus people is that they don't have that foundation. And maybe it's because they didn't have the adversity growing up that builds resilience, but they constantly need to be affirmed by the whole world. Listen, I'm sure you have experience having gone viral on TikTok. I've done a lot of media, a lot of journalism. People have told me to unalive myself too many times to count. People have called me every name in the book. They've cussed me out. They've cussed me out to my face. They've sent me creepy letters. I've had death threats, all these kinds of things. I'm not fazed because I know who I am. I'm confident in who I am. I like myself. I feel good about my beliefs and the work that I do. I have a healthy, loving relationship. I have good relationships with most of my family. I have close friends I can turn to and talk to. So if somebody tells me to unalive myself and cusses me out and calls me a bunch of slurs, I don't go and cry in my car and then film it. Whereas just using the wrong pronoun sends some of these people into melting into a puddle. And I laugh at them a little bit, but I actually feel really bad for them because like that's not good. That's not how, if you're an emotionally functioning full adult, you wouldn't really be responding like that to somebody.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I had a student. I have two student stories. I had one that was I was told at the beginning of the semester that the student was identifying as male. And again, I will respect your pronouns. The neo pronoun thing is still new to me. This is like in the past year. I've never had anyone ask me to use like zize, zem, zer, frog, whatever. There's that lady that's
The
she's so
pronoun
sweet.
gal.
She's, oh my God, I love her energy. And I do believe she has such a sweet and pure soul. I just wish she'd direct
She's
that
doing
energy.
more harm.
In my opinion, yes, but she's so sweet. It's like, you're just adorable in your energy and your lovingness. I just wish you'd not perpetuate this. But I had a student that I was told at the beginning of the semester was trans. This student was female. I mean, the student was female and presented female, did nothing whatsoever to present as male. And I know that I've learned from online that they do not owe me masc presenting. They do not owe me femme presenting. But the issue was, there's a dissonance that's going on in your head because this was a brilliant student. This student will have a very great career in science if the student chooses to pursue it. But when I would call on the student, and you can tell that I still have a hard time because I couldn't use the he, him, because you're looking at someone who is blatantly presenting female and wanting male pronouns. And then through the course of the semester, was going through something because then they ended up starting to present hyper feminized, almost to the point of a drag queen, but it was a biological cis female. Sorry, I know that's offensive now to say biological. So a cis female that was almost presenting in drag and got mad at me because the name that they wanted me to use was Toby. And I can use Toby all day long, but I couldn't use he, him in my mind because I kept slipping and saying she. And that student reported me to my department chair, saying that I was not being respectful of their transition and their journey.
What
And
transition?
that's the thing. I was telling the department chair, I said, you saw Toby. I said, Toby is not presenting in any way, shape, or form female. And I'm not trying to be rude. That is her journey, his journey, not my journey. I will be respectful, but it's having a hard time when you're seeing someone present hyper feminized to say he, him, especially, older gay men. We used to call everyone she in the community. It was just a term. You called other gay men she, you called lesbians she, you called trans people she. It was more of an inclusive thing. So that was one of the things that I was having to overcome when I first started teaching more and more
and you said
trans
something there,
students.
You said something there that's really interesting to me, which is they don't owe you masc or femme presenting. You've been educated by the internet. And I completely agree with that. They can do whatever they want. They owe us nothing. But I also don't think we owe them our speech. Now I will give it to them, but not like I'm not obligated to. I have my free speech. I don't have to call you she her if I don't want to. Or I guess in this case he him. And if you're not making any effort to do so, to present, like if I was in that situation, if I was teaching the class and there was a trans student who was clearly born female but was trying to pass male, I would do my best to remember to use he, him pronouns. But in the scenario you're describing, I wouldn't bother, because if they can't even be bothered to transition, they don't owe me that, but I don't owe them my speech. Like there's something about the pronoun crowd where there's an air of entitlement that I don't understand and I can't get behind, as if like everyone else is obligated to validate them. I think people should be nice. They should be respectful, but this is a free country and it is a country with freedom of speech, and nobody has the right to compel anybody else's speech. So I really am not a fan of that kind of entitlement that I so often see from the pronoun crowd.
Later, I was in charge of the GSA at that specific campus, which was the Gay Straight Alliance. And it was interesting because the majority of the members of the Gay Straight Alliance there were white, I would say. What's the proper term anymore? I don't know. I don't want to get canceled.
Well, you can
I
say
would
whatever
say,
you want on this
okay,
podcast, and it
okay,
doesn't matter if it's
fabulous.
offensive. And
All right, so they were born with female genitalia. This was the majority of the students that I had in the GSA. And they were asking questions, that people do of, what was it like in your day? And I'm like, gather around, kiddies. And I was telling them a story. I said, back in my day, I said, there wasn't really non-binary. I go, that's more of a new thing. I said, there may have been. I said, but no one identified that way. I go, we had femboys that were gay and very effeminate, and they would wear makeup and they would do their hair and they would dress very, very feminine. And sometimes they would dress as women. And we knew that they were gay men and they just happened to be more effeminate. We had lesbian women that we used to just call butch, and they would dress in full male attire. They would have short hair. And the weird thing was everybody was okay with that. Yeah, I know gay men have a tendency to have preferences and blah, 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 blah. But as a community, not as a hookup, but as a community, everybody was accepting of the ladyboy and of the butch lesbian. I go, it was okay to be that. I don't know when this happened where it was no longer okay to be the butch lesbian or the ladyboy. And one of the students who identified as trans came up to me at the end of my little story time and said, I think I'm just a butch lesbian. And I was like, I am not a counselor. I'm not getting into this conversation, but I'll listen if you want to talk. And she's like, I don't want to be a man, but I don't want to dress like this, and I don't want to do that. I go, and this student went by the name of Dean, and I said, Dean, did anyone ever tell you it's okay to just be you? I'm like, she's like, well, my therapist told me that I was trans, and that was the first time I've ever had someone tell me that. And they were like, my therapist said that I had gender dysphoria, and I'm like, I'm not a therapist. You can talk to me and I can answer questions of, my life and things like that, but just not everything needs a label. I said, it's okay because you're just hilarious. You're a great person. You happen to want to present male and you want to date women. If you like your breast, keep your breasts. I mean, there's no need to, you don't have to identify as a male to live your best life. Not saying that there aren't people out there that, like we said before, have gender dysphoria and want to make their outsides feel more like their insides. But sometimes their insides don't really jive with that either. And that's okay. It's okay to just be Dean, who's a great, funny person who dresses in dude's clothes and likes short hair, but still wants to be a woman and still wants to date women.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I want to ask you about a couple more things. One of which I find very interesting is this label of queer. I don't like to be called queer. I've never identified as queer, and there's always a certain type, and born female, white, bright colored hair that will describe you as queer without your consent. They'll be like, as part of the queer community, you get it. And I'm like, no, if you want to call yourself that, that's fine by me. Call yourself whatever you like. But I don't really like to be called that. And I didn't even grow up with it as a slur. I just that label doesn't fit me. I'm gay. I'm not queer, especially because I honestly view queer as kind of attached to a political movement at this point that I am not a part of personally. But I'm curious for you what it's been like, because you must have grown up with queer as a slur. And then all of a sudden you have all these Gen Z people basically telling you that we're going to say it and you have to like it.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because I refer to the younger generation of the alphabet mafia as queerlets. So it does kind of make me a hypocrite, but I did grow up with queer as a bad word. And I love when younger people try to educate me on the meaning of the word and the origin of the word and the history of the word. And I'm like, baby boy, baby girl, baby them, you have no idea. You have no idea what it was like to grow up in a small redneck town in Florida and be called queer, because it was never a friggin' term of endearment when I was called that. Now, I understand that they're appropriating it, And it's like you say, I don't want to be referred to as part of a queer community because I'm not queer. I'm gay. And I think that if I should be polite and respect your pronouns and what you want to be called, you should not call me queer because I don't like that word. The grumpy old gays that we're starting the podcast with, we were joking about, okay, well, if they're going to reclaim queer, then let's make it okay to reclaim the F word, the bundle of stick word, the little, British cigarette word that all of us hate. I mean, because why would you pick something that people are telling you that word may mean one thing, but was rooted in hate for so long? And we're telling you this, and you're like, oh, you just need to get over it. Okay, maybe I am. Maybe I'm old and I need to get over it. Then you need to get over someone misgendering you and stop crying in your car. You can't have it both ways, little queerlets.
But it is interesting because there is that, I don't know that it's hypocritical, but we're telling them that they have to be okay with being misgendered, but also don't call us queer. The difference is like, I'm just saying I don't want you to call me that. You are free to call me that. I'm not going to be reduced to a puddle of tears. I'm going to be like, all right, why'd you do that? And I'll move on with my life. I'm not going to attach that level of importance to it. But the queerlets, and I love that term, I might have to borrow that from you. They're not some of them are mentally ill. I'm just going to be honest, especially on TikTok. And I know you've received a lot of unhinged messages and comments. Tell us what that's been like when you've put out these honestly pretty milquetoast takes in the grand scheme of things, but on queer TikTok, controversial opinions. What has that been like encountering some of the mentally ill queerlets?
I think it's hilarious. Seriously, first of all, I don't think they understand like the older Gen X. If you have not noticed, I don't know what end of TikTok you're on, but there's like this whole rumbling in Gen X that, you had the millennials and Gen Z, younger millennials and Gen Zs poking the boomers for so long and blaming boomers for everything. And then there was this movement of, who's letting Gen X off the hook? So most of us Gen X people are now on TikTok and we're speaking out and we're trying to explain to you why we are the way we are. And we were the feral children. There was a wonderful lady on TikTok in the UK. She's a Gen Xer, and she was talking about a point where when she got pregnant, her mother was a boomer, older boomer, was saying, just so you know, I raised you. I'm not interested in raising grandchildren. So do not look to me as a babysitter and things like that. And it got a lot of Gen X people to thinking of the pressure that boomers had on them to have children, the societal pressures for them to have children. We're wondering, did that make us the way we are? Because we were feral children. We were latchkey kids. I remember I came home from school by myself at the age of 7, let myself in with a key. We knew to lock the door. We made ourselves a snack. We did homework. We watched cartoons, and our parents got home around 6 o'clock. We sent ourselves off to school. So we had really, really thick skin. And it's interesting growing up in that environment, getting called queer, getting called the F word all of the time, that these younger queerlets think that they're going to hurt my feelings by saying that I'm old, I need to die, I need to be turned to dust, and all of these other things. And the interesting thing for me is, do you not realize you're just giving me more content? Like, today, the TikTok that I made today was some woman who was like, I think it's funny that the older gay people need validation from people, the younger queers that are 20 years younger than you. And I'm like, what the hell kind of projection is that? I don't need your validation. I was fabulous before you were ever born. I'm gonna die fabulous. It's this whole weirdness that we don't, sticks and stones. We grew up with that mentality, and you being the mindless faceless troll on TikTok telling me that I need to unalive myself, I need to go away, I need to shut up. That one bothers me the most, is when I have like one person telling me that was supposedly an ally trying to tell me that grumpy old gay voices are not what we need right now. And I'm like, this is what annoys me. I love debating people. I don't have to agree with you. I'll still like you if you're a good person. We'll just disagree on things. But the movement to silence people who have differing opinions on social media is just absurd. And the unaliving myself and turning to dust just gives me more content to make fun of them.
And then
and I know that's
monetize the videos making fun of their hate comments.
right. It's absurd. It's like, y'all have me mistaken with Michelle Obama. I do not take the high road. My drag name would be Peppermint Petty. Okay. Cause you say something stupid, I'm going to come for you. And I have a couple times.
Iconic. But you know what's interesting? I saw, and you just made me think of that with some of the things you were saying. I saw that you posted on TikTok that you discovered the account for my friend Arielle Scarcella, who's a big YouTuber. And you were like, you really liked her content.
I did.
And of course,
I'd never met her, never, just found her on TikTok.
We're seeing more and more people calling themselves queer.
Where have you been all my life? Grumpy old gay rant of the day. I have just discovered this woman's TikTok and I love her. Because the old school gays, lesbians, bis, and trans were wondering what the fuck on.
I think she only started posting to TikTok pretty recently. She's been on YouTube, big on YouTube for a very long time. She's a friend of mine. But everyone was like, oh my God, don't you know she's a Republican? And you were like, so?
The weird thing was, so I stitched her TikTok without really going down the rabbit hole. I just found what she said was stitchable and I agreed with. So then I started getting all this pushback. And that's one of the first viral videos I had, I guess, was stitching her. And it was weird to me because the stitch got more views, likes, and comments than her original TikTok. And I didn't know that was a thing. So I went down the rabbit hole and I started watching her TikToks, and then I started subscribing to her YouTube. And people kept telling me, you can't like her because she's a conservative. You can't like her because she's a TERF. And I had heard the term TERF before, but I wasn't really like all that familiar because it got used so often. And I only heard it with J.K. Rowling. And I don't like Harry Potter. I'm too old for that crap. So I ended up going down the rabbit hole on what a TERF was. Why were they calling her a TERF? And I guess from the outside looking in, I thought to myself, I'm like, well, I don't really consider what she's saying is TERF.
She's not. No.
I'm looking at her as a woman who is defending other women. I look at her as a lesbian who was trying to explain that if I'm a lesbian and you are a trans woman, that I don't owe you a date just because you identify as a lesbian. And it was common sense. It was a common sense, very well articulated argument. Now, I don't agree with everything that she says, and I'm sure she doesn't agree with everything I say either. But I just thought, here is a woman who's out there speaking her mind, fellow Italian, and she's getting all of these labels thrown at her. And the weird thing was the comments that people were leaving. You can hate me as much as you want to. You can hate her as much as you want to. But when people were asking, I'm unfamiliar with her, I need to go check out her material or her content, and people saying, no, don't, she's a TERF. Let other people make the decision for themselves. I got accused of gatekeeping the LGBT community over a TikTok that I made literally stitching her. And
gatekeeping is good, actually.
I kind of agree.
You want to know one of the most famous examples of gatekeeping in the LGBT community? I'm sure I don't have to tell you this. Was keep making sure that the NAMBLA people weren't a part of it.
Yes,
they gatekept the people who wanted pedophilia to be part of the alphabet. Was very successfully gatekept out because it doesn't belong. It's not like the others. But they're like, why would you gatekeep the LGBT community? That's why, because not accepting everything in the world isn't good.
It is interesting that you brought that up because I almost made a TikTok on it, but I wasn't sure if it was I wasn't sure if it was going to be appropriate or going to get banned because I'm old enough to remember when I want to say it was the summer of '94 when they had the very long, it was like a mile long pride flag during the Pride Parade in New York. And I happened to be in New York and New Jersey because, I'm a New Jersey Italian. And I was up there for the summer. It was after my freshman year of college. And I remember on the news up there, they were interviewing the Pride organizers, and NAMBLA was trying to become part of the parade. And they told them, no, you are not the same as us. You cannot march with us. And they argued and argued and argued. And then I think there was a different parade that was happening in New York at the same time where you had more, I guess you would say, fringe members of the LGBT community that wanted their own parade, I guess. It's been 30 years. I don't remember. But I even remember that group said, no, NAMBLA cannot march with us. And you're absolutely
That's
right.
gatekeeping.
And to me, what I was accused of gatekeeping is a real conversation that I did change the names for of a straight married couple that they were identifying as queer, and it was in the stitch that I TikTok the TikTok that I stitch of Arielle, where I was like, what you two are married, what ownership do you have of queerness? And they're like, well, we identify as non-binary. And I'm like, but literally, what about you is non-binary? You're neither one of you are presenting even remotely androgynous. And I thought it was kind of a comical conversation. And this is the first time I had someone from Gen Z tell me that I was cringe, and I didn't know what that meant. And they're like, well, what you're saying right now is cringe. And I'm like,
Actually, I think what's cringe is appropriating our culture and our experiences. Like, they will never be yelled at and chased by homeless people, calling them faggots, like my boyfriend and I were once in DC. Like, because it's literally a female and a male who are married to each other, and they're just straight people. But we now have this broken online culture that for a long time we stigmatized victimhood, and people felt ashamed to be victims, and that was really bad and that was really wrong. But now we've almost valorized it and made oppression a form of social currency on the internet. So now people crave oppression, which is really perverse, in my opinion. And so you have people attempting to cosplay as a marginalized identity because in hyper online spaces, it's like bad to not be.
you're absolutely right. And the interesting feedback I got from that TikTok was the younger people accused me of gatekeeping. The older bisexual married couples knew exactly what I was talking about, and they were asking for clarification. That's the difference. They weren't accusing; they were asking for clarification. And I would go with them in the DMs and say, "You're a bisexual married couple. I apologize about the whole bi erasure thing. I'm still not exactly sure what it is, but if you identify as bi, you are still part of the community.
Right.
What I'm talking about is what." Offensive as it sounds, bored freaking straight people masquerading as something they're not. And I don't know why. It's like, we don't gatekeep that much. I mean, I know there was that push on TikTok a couple months ago where lesbians were talking about not wanting straight men in lesbian bars. And I've had great conversations with lesbians explaining to me why they don't want that. Because my stance is the more the merrier. I mean, app culture now, you kind of don't, like back in my day, you needed the gay bar to meet like-minded people. But now when everything's met in an online environment, it's like, why are bars segregated? But I definitely understood the lesbian perspective when they were like, hey, I see your point, but I want to give you mine. And I get that. What I don't understand is why anyone would, like what you're saying and what I say, is cosplay to be part of something that you're not. There's nothing wrong. We would still accept you with open arms. You don't need to make up a label. But to have a dialogue saying that label that you're appropriating is actually detrimental to people in our community, I don't understand why that's an offensive conversation to have. Why you appropriating anything remotely involving trans people when you're not actually trans, and you don't see that it actually is detrimental and hurts trans people, is selfish. It's cruel, but we're the bad people for calling it out. That's what I don't understand.
Well, no, me either, but that's why I started this podcast and why I have these conversations. Tim, it's been a pleasure. People need to follow your TikTok. It's hilarious. I will put a link in the description below, and you'll have to come back on again sometime because this was wonderful. Thank you so much for making the time.
Oh, thank you for having me.
All right, everybody, that's it for this episode of the Damage Control Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in, and don't forget to hit that like button on your way out, and maybe even consider subscribing and sticking around. With that, we'll talk again next week.